Next up, our second keynote speaker. I think he has the distinguishing role today of being the one speaker that my wife would probably not appreciate me hanging out with, and I think you'll get a sense of that after he gets started here. But I had a chance to talk to him a little beforehand, and remarkable kind of story that he's been through. And I think there's a lot there that I at least could kind of bond with, the trials and tribulations of getting something going. But I'll let him tell you about it. But a dating site for married people, right? He's, so anyway, Noel Biderman.
And I thought your wife was nervous because of this charisma that I...
Oh, yeah, that's right. I forgot to say he's such a good-looking guy, too.
Talked about that. You blew it.
Oh, sorry.
No, but really, I think I'm here to sex up this conference a little bit. And the unfortunate part is, after meeting with the censors, my speech, which was originally 20 minutes, is now 2 minutes and 13 seconds. So I'll have to be incredibly brief. And, I met with a bunch of the venture capitalists here and sat down and talked to them about my idea for a married dating service, and 3 wanted to slap me, 2 told me to get the hell out, and 1 guy winked at me, so you know who you are. We'll talk after. My kind of guy. But that is actually why I'm here, is to kind of give you my thesis anyways on where capital should flow to. But let's start with the notion of the light bulb idea that many of the entrepreneurs in this room have or try to articulate to people who are funding them. And I think it is important to realize that that light bulb idea comes from a confluence of areas, right? So I'll tell you my personal story. I could easily say to people, I was sitting on a plane, I read an article suggesting that a huge percentage of people going traditional dating sites, the Match.coms of the world, weren't really that single. They were looking to do something different. And so that's where the idea came from, which is partly true. But then you also have to know me, right? There's a step back. Part of that is, while I was sitting on that plane, I was a sports attorney. And if any of you have spent any time around professional athletics, it's not the most faithful crowd in the world. So my professional DNA already encompassed infidelity, because I would get phone calls in the middle of the night from clients that I would send, used to play for the Knicks, now play for Milan. There's professional basketball leagues all over the world, who would say, oh, no, I got a huge problem. My wife wants to come visit me in Italy. And I'd be like, what's the problem? My Italian wife? Not going to like that, right? So even in my career as an attorney, I was dealing with infidelity. So why not deal with it on a mass scale? But ultimately, when we talk about the idea of this light bulb moment, just as important of that idea is ultimately how you're going to fund it. And that decision is going to take you down a path, right? Whether it's search for profitability, search for audience, or if you challenge a societal notion, are you going to be supported in that? So the funding of your idea can sometimes be just as important as the idea itself. At least that's my philosophy. So when I think about the funding of the idea, if I'm talking to the VCs in this world, I have an opinion. I have an opinion because there's a couple of different ways to look at entrepreneurs. There's, the typical innovator, right? Somebody who has brought to life something that nobody else has ever thought of before. And, I recently got pitched on a guy who came up with an idea to insure fantasy sports athletes. Apparently, if you're a fantasy sport player, I don't know how many people in this room are, it's growing. I don't personally do it, but if your key players get injured in reality, it's pretty tough to win your fantasy league against your friends. And so I realized that the entry fee is only $50, but he wanted you to be able to insure that $50. So he's trying to invent something that nobody else has ever done before. The other kind of entrepreneur is the one that, is building that better mousetrap, has looked at something and said, it's flawed. I think I can do it better. I can improve upon that. And that's an interesting kind of individual to fund. But then there's this other one, and I kind of put myself in that category, I guess, which is we're not just in it for the commerce, but we're actually trying to move society in a different direction. Nobody would doubt that, the Henry Fords and the Steve Jobs of the world, and even the Hugh Hefners, have made a lasting imprint on society by being that kind of innovator, right? They have created real world-class products, but at the same time have changed the way our behavior is and how we think about things. And so ultimately, my belief is that if you're sitting here on a pile of money and looking to allocate that money, that you should seriously consider putting a premium on those controversial businesses. And here's the other reason why. If you run a controversial business, you find a lot of great things can happen. One, traditional companies don't venture there. They either are too slow, they're monolithic, or they're too rigid in their thinking. They're not going to go venture into those realms. So right away, that traditional competitive landscape may be non-existent. Part two is if you do break through, if you do catch a societal wave, the gravitational pull to that, there's pent up demand in a sense, right? It is going to be a true hockey stick. You're going to see all of a sudden, potentially hundreds of thousands, millions of users of your product and service, right? And that third part that's important to me, it's so much of why I do this event, or if any of you have seen me give TED Talks or, appear on, get yelled at by Dr. Phil or Sean Hannity, it's because I also believe that entrepreneurs, much like educators and much like artists and journalists, and unfortunately politicians, guide our society. We're all responsible for that. And so if we believe something, or in my case, if I see something which is, think about it, on my service alone, 25,000 people a day sign up to Ashley Madison, 25,000 who are self-publishing why they're coming here and why they're joining this social network. If you went and spoke to the leading researchers at NYU and Columbia, who, by the way, all work with me to look at our big data, they would tell you that before I came along, they couldn't even study this topic. Why? Because I could ask you all right now, put your hands up if you're cheating. Shocker. Shocker. Yeah, fair enough. Shocker. You just can't get people to confess this behavior pattern. So how do you study it, right? Studying it after the fact or using a cohort of university students, not really relevant. So it's only now with the advent of a site like mine that you can look at huge data. Hundreds of thousands of communications happen every single day on our service from both genders, all kinds of socioeconomic groups, all kinds of ethnic groups. That's really robust. That's really interesting. And so for the first time, we get a chance to see what society is behaving like. And so that's really interesting to me. That's really interesting to me as an entrepreneur who thinks that, hey, I came up with an idea for sure, and I've made me and my investors a ton of money, but I'm also pretty sure that I'm going to leave behind a legacy that's going to be much more interesting than just what you and I were discussing earlier, right? That there's more to it. And so my belief is in this room, people are thinking about how to allocate, and you can look at teams, and you should look at teams, and you should look at track records and history. And just, if you want to know a bit more about mine, I was also partially responsible for those real estate platforms that got mentioned earlier by someone. In the early days, in 1996, we started getting real estate board data and ultimately built something called Realtor.com. That was a venture that I was involved in my early days. And then, we did something with IP television, called Jump TV, another public company. And so Ashley Madison was just one of those brainchilds that we incubated that turned into something much bigger that I then thought warranted actually my personal attention and deep dive. And so, that's how we got there. But I genuinely believe that this capital allocation thing is an important one because I faced a mountain of resistance like no other. And I think another an investor here talked about the persistence part of it. I was told no by everyone, by every lawyer I met with, by every investment fund I spoke to, by countless potential partners. There was nobody who wanted to work with me on this business because they either didn't believe that there was a marketplace or that it could survive. And so now I stand back running the second biggest dating site on the planet. 33 countries, 22 million members. Perseverance is a great thing. And I would love to tell you that I had some great venture funding, but I didn't. I got neglected like so many others do. I had to do this on my own dime. Thankfully, I had those dimes, and it turned out to be really great. Now, I've got 40 institutional investors who all tell me that they know better than I do how to run this thing going forward, but they're mistaken about that too. So to the investors in this world, take a look at controversy. It's an incredible place to make your buck. And to the entrepreneurs amongst you who are thinking about a controversial business, but then say, well, you know what? Your family and friends will judge you for the person you are, not for the business you operate. There's tons and tons of businesses out there that one could argue, have, ethical issues. McDonald's is not the healthiest product on the planet. Alcohol leads to disease and addiction. There's all kinds of things out there. In its time, when they put the pill on the market, people were outraged by its presence. Oh, this is going to free up female sexuality, and God forbid we allow to do that. Or put women in bikinis. I'm not saying controversy and sex are the same thing, but I'm kind of saying they're the same thing, right? That's where controversy comes from. And so ultimately, I think the lesson I can impart here is that persistence one, but that, if you're thinking of a controversial idea, but you're really saying, what is controversy? It's saying, this is what society looks like today. I think it's going to look like this tomorrow. and you're betting on a societal change, right? Let's look at the institution of marriage, something I'm become very familiar with personally because I'm married and because I kind of play in this landscape. But you know, it wasn't that long ago in this country, if you wanted to get into a marriage, interracial marriage, you actually had to go to the Supreme Court and fight for that right. That wasn't that long ago. So imagine, if you will, being in that place in time and sensing that that was going to change. You know, now 17% of American marriages are described as interracial. What if you had made that bet that that was coming and you built the eHarmony for interracial marriages? You would be a rich guy or gal, right? So societal change is a great place to place a bet as an entrepreneur. And so if you're funding entrepreneurs, you should really take a long look at controversial business models.